Okay, y'all. You are not going to believe the insane, wild, heartbreaking story I'm about to unpack for you. This is how I found out the woman I married, or thought I married, was a complete fraud, living a life I couldn't even comprehend, a life deeply, terrifyingly entwined with professional crime. This isn't just a story, this was my life, and it was built on a mountain of lies so high I'm still getting dust off myself. This is the story of how my girlfriend was a professional. Kidnapper? Yeah, you read that right. I've debated sharing this for a long time, but you need to hear it. Maybe you'll see red flags I missed. Maybe you'll just be captivated by the sheer audacity of it all. But either way, you need to hear it. If you're ready for the whole unfiltered truth, and trust me, it's a lot, hit that like, subscribe right now, and honestly, share this with anyone who needs to hear it. You won't want to miss a single detail of this. Grab a drink, buckle up, because this is going to be a long ride. All right, deep breath. Here's where it all began. It started, like so many stories do, innocently enough. A mutual friend's birthday party, late summer, rooftop bar in downtown Portland. I wasn't even planning on staying late. Just swing by, say hi, grab one drink, and head home. Standard introvert plan. But then I saw her. Across the crowded patio, laughing, hair catching the setting sun just right. She had this incredible energy, radiant and just captivating. That was Isabella. She was everything you'd want on paper. Beautiful, intelligent, funny, seemed incredibly driven. Our mutual friend Liam introduced us. He'd only met her recently too, through some work connection, apparently. Said she was a bit mysterious, but totally harmless. Famous last words, right? We talked for hours that night. It felt electric. We clicked on everything. Music, movies, our views on life, dumb inside jokes within minutes. She told me she was an international consultant for NGOs focused on humanitarian aid and disaster relief. Sounded noble, important, maybe a little vague, but hey, people have complicated jobs. I was genuinely impressed. My job as a graphic designer felt decidedly less glamorous in comparison. We exchanged numbers that night, and the texting started immediately. By the next day, we talked for hours on the phone. Within a week, we were inseparable. It was a whirlwind, the kind you read about and think, that only happens in movies. Every date was amazing. She was adventurous, spontaneous, and incredibly attentive. She listened, really listened. She seemed genuinely fascinated by my life, my work, my boring habits. She mirrored my energy perfectly. If I was feeling quiet, she was calm. If I was energetic, she matched it. It felt like I had found my missing piece. Looking back, the speed was the first red flag, though I didn't see it then. Everything accelerated so fast. After 2 weeks, she suggested we spend a long weekend out of town. After a month, we were talking about moving in together. By 3 months, we were practically living out of each other's apartments anyway. It felt right, though. It felt so right, like we'd known each other forever and were just catching up on lost time. My friends, Liam included, were a little taken aback by the pace, but they saw how happy I was. They met her, liked her. She was effortlessly charming, the kind of person who could make anyone feel like the most interesting person in the room. She'd ask my friends about their lives, remember little details. She was a pro at making connections. Now I know why. She didn't have much family talk, which was a bit odd. Said they were estranged, lived overseas, complicated stuff. Okay, sad, but believable. My own family was back east, so it wasn't like she had to integrate with a huge local clan. She met my sister once when she visited Portland, and Isabella was just perfect. My sister loved her. She seems like such a catch, she said. And she did. There were tiny things, though, little flickers in the periphery that I dismissed, like she never had mail sent to her apartment, always a P.O. box across town. She said it was because her job involved a lot of travel, and sensitive documents, easier to manage that way, made sense at the time. Her phone was always on silent, notifications off, unless she was actively using it. She said she hated distractions. Okay, relatable. She was incredibly private about her work, vague reports of travel to different countries, consulting in Southeast Asia, a quick trip to Europe for a project. But she could never share details because of client confidentiality, sensitive political situations. Again, plausible for someone working with NGOs in potentially unstable regions. She was also weirdly good at things she shouldn't have been, knew way too much about secure communications, seemed overly aware of her surroundings, had this intensity in her eyes, sometimes like she was assessing threats. She said it was from working in dangerous zones, had to be vigilant, sounded brave even. I admired her for it. I just thought she was a badass humanitarian. One time, early on, maybe 2 months in, she got a call late at night. She was usually so calm, but she tensed up immediately. Her face went pale. She whispered a few words in a language I didn't recognize. Sounded Eastern European, maybe. Then hung up. She just stared into space for a minute, breathing heavily. I asked if everything was okay. She snapped out of it, forced a smile. "Oh, just a work crisis," she said, waving it off. "Happens sometimes, comes with the territory." She brushed it aside so quickly, changed the subject, was back to her charming self within moments. It was jarring, but I told myself, okay, intense job, makes sense. She also didn't have a lot of long-term friends locally. Just Liam, really, and he didn't know her well either. Her explanations: moved around a lot for work, hard to maintain, close ties. Another thing I accepted because it fit the narrative of her international consultant life. Everything she presented added up to a compelling, slightly mysterious, incredibly attractive package, and I was completely, utterly smitten. I didn't just fall in love with Isabella, I fell in love with the idea of Isabella, the person she carefully constructed, the kind, brave, intelligent woman saving the world who somehow chose little old me. It felt like a dream, and that, my friends, is exactly what she wanted me to believe. A beautiful, perfectly constructed dream. Because soon those little flickers of oddness wouldn't be so easy to dismiss. They would start to coalesce into something much darker, something that would eventually shatter my reality and show me the horrifying truth about the woman I was falling in love with. So there I was, head over heels for Isabella, convinced I'd hit the relationship jackpot. We moved in together after about 6 months, found a nice little place in a quieter neighborhood, a small house with a backyard. It felt incredibly domestic and normal, a stark contrast to the little bits of international intrigue I glimpsed from her work. She seemed to relish the normalcy too. We'd cook together, binge-watch shows, go for walks in the park with my friend Sarah's dog. We'd borrow him sometimes. Isabella wasn't keen on getting her own pet, another small thing I didn't question. Too much travel. Life felt good, really good. I was happy, fulfilled. Finally felt like I was building a future with someone. My friends were mostly on board now, seeing her settle in, seeing how happy I was. Sarah, my closest friend, still had a few reservations, though. "She's lovely," Sarah said to me one day over coffee. "But she's like a chameleon, isn't she? Like, she adapts to whatever situation she's in instantly. You ever feel like you don't know who she is underneath it all?" I brushed it off. She's just good with people, Sarah. Comes from her job. I realize now Sarah's intuition was screaming, and I was just putting my fingers in my ears. The work crises became more frequent. Sometimes she'd have to leave town with zero notice. A frantic call, a sudden packing of a small, nondescript duffel bag, never a suitcase, always a duffel, and she'd be gone. Emergency in Lebanon, or need to get to Brussels for urgent talks. She'd be gone for a few days, maybe a week. Communication would be spotty. Bad service where I am. Can't talk, sensitive meeting. She'd come back looking exhausted, sometimes withdrawn, sometimes hyper-alert. She'd offer vague stories about the difficulty of the situations, the poverty, the politics. I'd feel bad for her, try to comfort her, make her favorite meal. During these trips, I'd sometimes notice odd things left behind. Once, I found a burner phone tucked away in a drawer I rarely went into. It was off. When I asked her about it, she didn't even flinch. "Oh, that old thing, project phone, different country, different network. Forgot it was there." She took it, and I never saw it again. Another time, I found a wad of foreign currency, euros and some currency I didn't recognize, stashed inside a book. She said it was left over from a trip, easier to keep some cash handy than rely on cards everywhere. Again, sounded reasonable for her supposed job. Red flag, rationalized. Red flag, rationalized. It was becoming a pattern. She was incredibly secretive about her past. I knew the basics, estranged family, grew up abroad somewhere ambiguous, but she'd never share photos, never tell specific stories. If I asked about her childhood, she'd give a brief, almost rehearsed answer and quickly turn the conversation back to me or to our future. "My past isn't interesting," she'd say, with a dismissive wave. "Our future is." It felt romantic at the time, like she was so focused on us. Now I know she just didn't have a real past she could share, not one that aligned with Isabella. There were other little behavioral quirks. She was meticulous about security, double-checking locks constantly. Installing a complex alarm system I thought was overkill for our quiet neighborhood. She was uneasy if strangers came to the house, even delivery people. "You can't be too careful," she'd say, citing her experiences in dangerous parts of the world. Made sense-ish. One weekend, she had one of her sudden trips. This one was allegedly to assist with a humanitarian crisis in Central America. She left Friday morning. Saturday afternoon, I was cleaning up a bit, tidying the bedroom. I went to put some books back on her shelf and noticed one seemed heavier than it should be. It was a hollowed-out book. Inside, there wasn't money this time. There were tools. Small, shiny metal tools. Looked like lockpicks. And a small, sealed plastic bag containing what looked like micro SD cards and a couple of tiny USB drives. My blood went cold. This wasn't leftover foreign currency. This wasn't a project phone. This looked nefarious. This looked like something out of a spy movie. I stood there, holding the book, my heart pounding. Humanitarian aid workers don't carry lockpicks and hidden data storage. What the hell was this? I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The rationalizations I'd been making for months suddenly felt thin, transparent. The vague job, the sudden trips, the secrecy, the security paranoia, the burner phone, the foreign cash, and now this. Lockpicks. I knew deep down that this was more than just a work crisis. This was something else entirely. Something she was hiding. And for the first time, I wasn't just curious or slightly unsettled. I was genuinely scared. Who was Isabella? And what exactly was she doing on these trips? The woman I loved, the woman I shared my home with, was clearly living a double life. And I had a sickening feeling I was only just scratching the surface. Holding that book in my hands, I knew my life was about to change, and not for the better. Holding that hollowed-out book filled with lockpicks and mysterious data cards, the pleasant domestic bubble I'd been living in for the past year popped. It didn't pop with a bang, more like a slow, terrifying deflation. Every single little red flag I had ignored or rationalized suddenly flew up and smacked me in the face. The constant secrecy, the vagueness about her past, the weird language on the phone call, the security obsession, the burner phone, the hidden cache, the sudden disappearances. It all added up to one undeniable truth. Isabella was not who she said she was, not even close. My mind raced. What was she? A spy? A thief? Involved in something illegal? The lockpicks pointed towards breaking and entering. The data cards, stealing information. My imagination conjured up all sorts of scenarios, each one worse than the last, but none of them felt quite right. None explained the full picture of her elaborate facade. I carefully put everything back exactly as I found it. My hands were shaking. I felt like I was in a movie, but a terrifying one where I was the oblivious side character who suddenly realizes he's in over his head. I tried to think. What could I do? Confront her? What would I say? "Hey, found your spy tools, what's up?" She was incredibly skilled at deflection and charming her way out of things. I doubted she'd confess. More likely, she'd spin some incredible, complicated lie, or worse, turn it back on me for snooping. I felt cornered. I decided I couldn't confront her without more information. I needed to know what I was dealing with. This was the turning point. I stopped being the naive, love-struck partner and started looking at her with suspicion. I began paying attention to everything. Her phone habits, still on silent, but now I noticed she'd angle it away from me when texting. The coded language she'd sometimes use on calls she thought I wasn't paying attention to. Package is en route, delivery successful, client is satisfied. She'd always speak quietly, and usually in the other room. When she got back from that trip a few days later, I watched her closely. She was her usual charming self, seemed genuinely happy to be home. She hugged me, told me she missed me. It felt practiced, inauthentic. I felt like I was looking at a stranger wearing the face of the woman I loved. It was a sickening feeling. I managed to ask, casually, "How was the trip? Everything okay with the crisis?" She gave me a bright smile. "Managed it. Was tough work seeing the devastation, but we made a difference." She launched into a brief, generic description of the conditions there, using language that sounded straight out of a news report. No specific details, nothing personal, just broad strokes. The lack of detail, which I used to accept as professionalism, now screamed fabricated. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own home. It felt horrible, invading her privacy, but I felt I had no choice. My safety, maybe even my life, felt like it depended on understanding what she was. I looked through her things when she was out, which was rare. She was often home when not traveling, another inconsistency given her supposedly demanding international job. I found more oddities, passports with different names and slightly different photos, not just one or two, but several, stashed in different places, a drawer, a false bottom in a jewelry box, even sewn into the lining of a jacket she never wore. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. Each one was a different identity. All her, all fake. This wasn't just lying about your age or a past relationship. This was multiple, professionally made identities. My mind reeled. Who needs this? Many fake passports? This was beyond a consultant, beyond a spy even, unless she was a ghost agent or something I couldn't fathom. I started using her computer when she wasn't around, careful to clear my tracks. She was tech-savvy, had layers of security, but I managed to find things. Encrypted files I couldn't open, browser history that was scrubbed clean daily, except for visits to obscure news sites about international incidents, or sometimes, weirdly, specific flights and manifests. I found encrypted communication apps I'd never heard of. The most chilling discovery on her computer, though, wasn't data. It was a single, seemingly innocuous document hidden deep within layers of folders and disguised as a budget spreadsheet. It was a log. Dates, times, locations, and code names. Next to each code name was a brief note: package delivered, client received, negotiations complete. The locations were all over the world. The dates stretched back years, long before
I met her. There were dozens upon dozens of entries. It looked like a ledger.
a ledger of something. Something she delivered or retrieved, something involving clients and negotiations. What kind of consulting involved packages and clients across the globe, tracked in a coded ledger? Combined with the multiple identities, the tools, the secrecy, the sudden travel, the hypervigilance, the pieces were starting to form a picture that was horrifyingly clear, but one my mind still refused to fully accept. This wasn't just dishonesty, this was a life built on deep, professional deception. The woman I loved wasn't just lying about her job, she was living a completely fabricated existence. And that ledger, the passports, the tools, they weren't just evidence of a shady past, they were evidence of a terrifying present. I felt a cold dread settle in my bones. I was living with a ghost, a phantom who moved through the world under a dozen different names, doing something that required lockpicks and encrypted logs and constantly watching her back. The question was no longer if she was hiding something, but what? And I was about to find out. It was worse than I could have possibly imagined. Holding those fake passports and looking at that coded ledger, my mind just broke a little. It was like the foundation of my reality had just crumbled. Isabella, the woman I loved, the woman I lived with, wasn't real. At least, the Isabella
I knew wasn't. She was a construct, a character played with terrifying skill. The immediate fear was, okay, she's some kind of criminal, a spy, a high-level thief, but even that felt too simple, too small to explain the sheer complexity of the
deception. Multiple identities, encrypted everything, lockpicks, a global ledger. This was professional. This was calculated. I knew I had to find out more. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake at night next to her, her breathing slow and steady, and just stare at the ceiling, my heart hammering in my chest. Who was this person beside me? What dark secrets lay behind those seemingly kind eyes? The domestic life we'd built, the shared meals, the movie nights, the plans for the future. It all felt like a grotesque pantomime. I started focusing my search. I couldn't risk digging too obviously into the ledger or the hidden communication apps yet. They felt too hot, too complex. The passports, though, they offered a potential entry point into her past, or old past anyway. I picked one of the names from the passports I'd found. Let's call this identity Eliza Vance. This passport looked particularly well worn, suggesting it might be an older, frequently used identity. I started searching online for Eliza Vance. It was tough at first. No social media profiles, no obvious online footprint. It was like this person didn't exist or had been scrubbed clean. But I kept digging using more obscure search engines, looking at old databases, public records. And then I found something. It was a mention, just a brief note, in an archived forum for alumni of a specialized security and risk management program. The kind of program that trains people in things like executive protection, surveillance, counter-surveillance, defensive driving, even tactical skills. And there, listed among the attendees for a course 15 years ago, was an Eliza Vance, listed with a city and state that wasn't anywhere Isabella had ever claimed to live or have connections to. My stomach dropped. A specialized security and risk management program? This was miles away from humanitarian aid consultant. Humanitarian workers don't get trained in defensive driving and counter-surveillance in obscure, high-level programs. This wasn't just a different job. This was a different world. A world that suddenly made a lot more sense of her weird skills, her paranoia, her hypervigilance. This was the first major, undeniable piece of evidence that the core story she'd told me about herself was a complete fabrication. Isabella, the empathetic, world-saving consultant, was a lie. At her core, she was someone trained in security, in protection, or maybe, I thought with dawning horror, in something far more active, something that required those skills. I spent days trying to find more on Eliza Vance. It was like hitting a wall. That single forum mention was the only real trace. It was frustrating, terrifying, but it confirmed my deepest fears. The woman I was living with had undergone intense, specialized training that had absolutely nothing to do with helping people in disaster zones. I started cross-referencing dates. The dates on that security program attendance lined up roughly with the earliest entries in her coded ledger. This wasn't a recent development. This was a life she'd been living for a long time, long before she met me. The implications were chilling. Everything about our relationship, every declaration of love, every shared moment, was it all just part of the disguise? Was I just a convenient cover? Or maybe, I thought with a fresh wave of nausea, was I something else entirely in her intricate plan? I kept pretending everything was normal. It was the hardest acting job of my life. Smiling, making conversation, sharing our bed, all while my mind was racing, trying to piece together the horrifying puzzle. Every time she left for a trip, the anxiety was unbearable. Where was she really going? Who was she meeting? What was she doing? The vague descriptions of her work now sounded like cruel jokes. Helping displaced families, or moving packages,
Using skills from a security program? The dread was a constant companion. I felt trapped. I couldn't go to the police based on a few fake passports, a cryptic ledger I couldn't read, and a forum post about a security course.
It sounded insane. And what if she found out I was investigating? What was she capable of? A woman with multiple identities and advanced training. My imagination conjured up scenarios I didn't want to think about, so I kept digging, in secret, late at night, feeling more isolated than ever. The discovery of the Eliza Vance identity and the security training was just the first crack in the facade. I knew there was a whole, terrifying reality behind it, and I was determined and utterly terrified to uncover the rest. The fake passports were a clear lie. The security training was a clear indicator of her real skill set. But the ledger held the key to what she was using those skills for, and I had to figure out how to read it. Discovering the Eliza Vance identity and the security program was a gut punch. It ripped a hole in the Isabella narrative I'd been living, but it didn't fully explain the multiple passports, the constant travel, the hidden cash, the lock picks, or that coded ledger. It just confirmed she was living a deep, fundamental lie. The next step was to try and understand the pattern of that lie and figure out what she was actually doing. I became obsessed with that ledger. I knew it was the key. Dates, locations, code names, brief notes like package delivered, client.
Satisfied. What kind of packages or what kind of clients?
Using my limited technical skills and after a lot of trial and error with decryption tools I found online, I managed to crack the format, but not the actual code names or notes yet. It was like looking at a spreadsheet with column headers. I understood date, time, location, entity, status. But the data cells were all in a language I didn't speak. But just seeing the structure of it reinforced the chilling feeling that this was a professional operation, meticulously logged. I started trying to find connections between the locations listed in the ledger and the dates. Her travel dates always lined up perfectly with entries in the ledger. She wasn't just visiting these places for consulting, she was performing a specific task listed in that log. I cross-referenced the locations and dates with news reports. From those areas around those times, most entries corresponded to mundane days in various cities, but a few stood out. A few dates lined up with minor local news stories I hadn't paid attention to before. A wealthy businessman who briefly went missing in Buenos Aires, a high-profile negotiation that suddenly stalled in Geneva, a strange incident at a remote estate in the French countryside. Individually, they meant nothing. Taken together with Isabella's presence in those locations on those dates and the coded ledger entries, my mind started making terrifying leaps. Simultaneously, I was trying to understand how she maintained the deception. I started noticing her manipulation tactics more clearly. She was a master of gaslighting. If I ever asked a slightly pointed question, even innocently, about her work or a trip, she'd deflect with charm, make me feel slightly silly for asking, or turn it around and make it about my supposed lack of trust or understanding of her difficult job. Oh, you know I can't talk about the specifics, darling. It's highly sensitive. Don't you trust me? And because I loved her, because I wanted to believe the best, I'd back down, apologize even, feeling guilty for my completely valid curiosity. She created an environment where questioning her felt like an attack on the relationship. It was a brilliant, cruel form of control. She also isolated me subtly. She never discouraged me from seeing my friends, but her schedule, her sudden trips,
Our special nights in gradually meant I saw them less and less.
when I did, I couldn't talk about the weird stuff because she was the weird stuff. How do you explain to your friends that you think your girlfriend might be a spy without sounding completely unhinged? So I kept it inside, the secrets building, a wall between me and the people I used to confide in. And that left me more and more reliant on and isolated with her. Another layer of manipulation I didn't see until much later. I went back to the physical evidence, the lockpicks, the hidden data cards. What were on those cards? I didn't have the technical ability to access them, but their existence suggested she was acquiring or transporting sensitive digital information. The foreign currency stash was larger than I initially thought, spread across different locations in the house. This wasn't just leftover travel money, this was significant cash reserves in multiple currencies. The Eliza Vance security training, the multiple identities, the coded ledger entries lining up with her trips and vague international incidents, the hidden tools, the cash, the expert manipulation. It all pointed towards a life far more dangerous and criminal than I had ever imagined. She wasn't just lying, she was actively engaged in something that required deception, movement across borders, specialized skills, and left no trace. But what? A smuggler? A spy? A mercenary? None of it quite fit perfectly, the packages, the clients, the negotiations in the ledger. It sounded transactional, person to person, not just moving goods or data. And the specific security training she had, it was focused on protecting people, yes, but also on tracking and apprehending targets. The suspense was killing me.
Living with her, knowing what I knew, pretending Everything was normal, felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. Every touch felt like a lie. Every kiss felt like a betrayal. I was terrified of being discovered, terrified of what she might do if she knew I was unraveling her life's work.
But I was more terrified of not knowing, of staying in the dark, of not understanding the full, horrifying truth of who I was sharing my life with. I felt like I was gathering pieces of a monster, but I hadn't yet seen its full, terrifying form. The ledger, I knew, held the answer. I just needed one more piece to crack the code. And that piece was about to fall into my lap, changing everything forever. The tension in the house was suffocating, even if only I could feel it. I was a coiled spring, watching her every move, analyzing every word, all while she seemed oblivious, still playing the part of my loving partner. I was living in a constant state of hypervigilance, the same kind she exhibited, only mine was directed at her. I was still chipping away at the ledger, trying different decryption methods, looking for any pattern, any clue in the code names or brief notes. I also kept searching online, cross-referencing dates and locations from the ledger with news, trying to find a connection. I focused on some of the older entries back from when she was supposedly Eliza Vance and fresh out of that security program. One afternoon, while she was out on an errand, a trip I now knew was probably another entry in that damned ledger, I stumbled upon something while digging through a box of old files she had stored away. It was a physical, paper address, book tucked inside a false bottom of the box. It looked old, maybe 5-10 years old. Most of the entries were just phone numbers with initials or single names, but one entry caught my eye, a name, Mr. Dubois, and next to it, a date range and a note, client, Paris operation, status, resolved, Mr. Dubois. The name didn't ring any bells, but the note did. Client, Paris operation. Was this a key to the ledger? I rushed back to the computer, heart pounding. I looked through the ledger entries from around the dates listed, next to Mr. Dubois in the address book. There were several entries during that period, all marked with a code I hadn't been able to decipher yet, but the location was consistently Paris. And the status note in the ledger for those entries? Package secured, transfer complete, client liaison, package secured. Transfer complete, client liaison, combined with client Paris operation. Status resolved, and connecting back to the security training, the multiple identities, the secrecy, the people-focused aspects of her skills, it clicked. It all horrifyingly, sickeningly clicked into place. I felt faint. I knew with absolute certainty what she was doing. I needed one more piece of confirmation. I searched online for Mr. Dubois Paris missing or Mr. Dubois Paris incident around those specific dates, and I found it. A series of old articles from a French news archive. The headline, translated, sent a wave of nausea through me. Prominent. Businessman Claude Dubois' son abducted in Paris. Ransom paid. Claude Dubois' son. Abducted. Ransom paid. And Isabella, Eliza Vance, was in Paris at the exact same time, logging package secured, transfer complete, and listing Mr. Dubois as a client with the status resolved. My breath hitched. Package secured. The kidnapped son was the package. Transfer complete. The ransom. Client liaison. Dealing with the father, Claude Dubois. Client, Paris operation. Status resolved. The kidnapping was successful. The ransom paid. The objective complete for her client. The puzzle wasn't just about fake identities or shady dealings. It was about people. People being treated as packages. People being secured and transferred. The coded ledger wasn't a log of smuggled goods or stolen data. It was a log of human beings. Isabella wasn't a spy or a thief. She was something far more monstrous. She was a professional kidnapper. The woman I shared my life with, the woman who cooked me dinner and held me when I was sad and talked about our future, was involved in abducting people. Children, adults, for ransom, for other reasons I couldn't.
Even begin to guess the lock picks weren't for breaking into buildings.
They were for bypassing security to get to people. The security training wasn't for protection, it was for tracking targets, evading capture, handling packages. The multiple identities weren't just cover, they were necessary tools for crossing borders with human cargo. The hidden cash wasn't travel money, it was payment, possibly her cut of ransoms. Everything fell into place with sickening clarity. Every red flag, every inconsistency, every moment of unease, every work crisis, every sudden trip, it all pointed to this horrifying truth, the charm, the empathy, the connection. It was all a performance, a facade crafted to make her seem harmless, relatable, lovable, while she was actively engaged in one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. I stood there, frozen, the address book falling from my numb fingers. My world, the seemingly normal, loving world I had built with her, didn't just have a crack in it, it had exploded. I was living with a professional kidnapper. Not someone who knew one or was connected to one. She was doing it. Active, cold-blooded, treating human lives as transactions. The terror that flooded me was unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just fear of her anymore, it was a primal, gut-wrenching realization of the immense danger I was in. If she was capable of kidnapping, what else was she capable of? And what would she do to me if she found out I knew? I wasn't just the oblivious partner anymore. I was a liability. I had uncovered the truth, and I knew with chilling certainty that my life was no longer just complicated or heartbreaking, it was in immediate, mortal danger. I stood there, the old address book in my hand, the words, Client, Paris Operation, Status, Resolved, and the name Mr. Dubois echoing in my head. The police articles about Claude Dubois' son's abduction and ransom. It wasn't a puzzle anymore. It was a mirror shattering, showing me a reflection of absolute horror. Isabella. My Isabella. The woman I planned a future with. A professional kidnapper. The world tilted. My home, the place I felt safest, suddenly felt like the most dangerous place on earth. Every corner seemed to hide a threat. Every shadow felt like a potential ambush. My heart wasn't just pounding. It felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. My palms were slick with sweat. I felt physically ill, a wave of nausea washing over me. It wasn't just about the lies anymore. That was bad enough. But this was pure evil. This wasn't some abstract crime. This was stealing human beings, traumatizing families, inflicting
unimaginable pain for money. And the woman I loved, the woman I trusted, was doing it, actively, professionally. All those red flags that I'd rationalized, they weren't just quirks of a difficult job.
They were pieces of a terrifying profile. Her secrecy? Necessary to hide her monstrous acts. The sudden trips, going to collect packages or deliver clients, the vague work descriptions. Couldn't tell the truth because the truth was horrific. The security paranoia. Not just vigilant, but someone constantly watching her back because of the dangerous world she operated in. The multiple identities, essential for moving across borders undetected, sometimes with a victim in tow, sometimes after a job was done. The lockpicks, tools of her trade, used to bypass security systems to reach her targets. The hidden cash, her payment, blood money, and the manipulation. Oh God, the manipulation. The way she'd charm her way out of questions make me feel guilty for doubting her, isolate me subtly from my friends, so I had no one to talk to about the weirdness. That wasn't just a controlling partner, that was a professional handler, making sure her cover wasn't blown, making sure I stayed in the dark, a useful, unsuspecting accessory to her crimes. I wasn't a partner, I was a mark, a prop in her elaborate,
horrifying play. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was living with a monster. A highly skilled, highly dangerous monster who had perfected the art of deception to facilitate kidnapping.
and I had just uncovered her deepest, darkest secret. What did she do to people who knew her secrets? The answer was likely not good. I had to get out. Immediately. The thought was a jolt of pure adrenaline. But how? How do you escape someone who is trained in surveillance, in evasion, potentially in physical restraint? Someone who clearly thinks nothing of inflicting harm on others? She knew my routines. She knew the house. She knew me. Every exit felt like a potential trap. Could I call the police? My mind raced. What would I say? "Hi, I think my girlfriend..."
Is a professional kidnapper because I found some fake passports, a weird list on her computer, and an old address book with a name that matches a kidnapping victim. It sounded insane, and even if they believed me, contacting them felt incredibly risky. What if she found out before they could act?
Would they even understand the level of danger she represented? This wasn't petty crime. This was international, high-stakes, professional abduction. I felt a suffocating panic set in. I was trapped in my own home with a predator. Every minute she was gone on that errand felt like borrowed time. What if she came back and sensed something was wrong? What if she had some kind of contingency plan for partners who got too curious? I forced myself to breathe. Panicking wouldn't help. I
Had to be smart.
had to be like her, in a way. Calculated. Cover my tracks, pretend. I carefully, meticulously put the address book back exactly where I found it. I went back to the computer, cleared the browser history again, made sure there were no digital footprints of my frantic search. I tried to make everything look exactly as it had before I started digging. Then I sat down and tried to think logically. I needed a plan, a way to get out of the house, away from her, safely. I couldn't confront her. That was too dangerous. I couldn't just walk out the door and hope she didn't come after me. She was too skilled, too connected, too ruthless. I needed help. But who could I trust? My friends? Sarah, who'd had those initial reservations about Isabella? Liam, who introduced us and clearly had no idea? Telling them would put them in danger too, maybe. And would they even believe me? The weight of the secret was crushing. I was isolated by her manipulation, and now isolated by the horrifying truth I'd discovered. As I sat there, frozen in fear and trying to plot my escape, I heard the distinct sound of her car pulling into the driveway. My blood ran cold. She was back, way sooner than I expected. I hadn't planned anything concrete. I hadn't even had time to compose myself. Panic seized me again. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to compose my face, to wipe away the terror that must have been etched all over it. I forced a neutral expression. I needed to be the man she thought she knew, the oblivious, loving partner, the one who knew nothing of fake passports, coded ledgers, and kidnapped children. I walked to the living room, trying to keep my gait normal, trying to stop my hands from shaking. I heard the key in the lock. She was coming in. "Hey, honey, I'm back," her voice called out, cheerful, completely normal. It was a jarring contrast to the storm raging inside me. "Hey," I managed to call back, trying to inject warmth into my voice, a warmth I didn't feel. She walked in, looking tired, but smiling. She dropped her duffel bag by the door. "Long day. Grabbed us some takeout. Hope you're hungry." Hungry? My stomach was twisted into knots of pure fear. I could barely breathe, let alone eat. But I forced myself to smile. "Sounds great," I lied. We sat down to eat, the small talk feeling incredibly surreal. She chatted about traffic, about a minor issue she'd had to resolve on her trip. A carefully crafted, vague story, no doubt. I nodded, made appropriate sounds of interest, my mind racing 1,000,000 miles an hour. Was she watching me? Could she tell something was off? Was this normal tiredness or the exhaustion of someone who'd just delivered a package? Every touch felt like a lie, every smile felt like a mask. I was sitting across the table from a professional kidnapper, pretending she was the woman I loved, knowing that at any moment my discovery could be revealed, and I had no idea what she would do. The danger wasn't a theoretical concept anymore. It was sitting right there, eating pad thai, looking beautiful and utterly terrifying. I knew I couldn't stay another night. I had to get out. And I had to do it before she realized I knew her secret. The escape had to happen soon. Very soon. That night was the longest of my life. Lying in bed next to her, pretending to be asleep, while my mind was wide awake, racing with fear and the desperate need to escape. Every creak of the house, every shift in her breathing, sent a jolt of
adrenaline through me. I planned and replanned my escape in the darkness. Leaving was complicated. I couldn't just walk out in the middle of the night. She was a light sleeper, always hyper-aware. Any sudden movement, any sound, and she'd be instantly awake and alert. And then what? She'd see the terror in my eyes, know I knew, and who knew what she'd do.
I pictured scenarios ripped from movies, but this was my life, and the stakes were terrifyingly real. My best chance was during the day, when she was out. She still had those unpredictable errands or meetings. I needed to wait for one of those windows, but waiting felt excruciating. What if she didn't leave the house for days? What if she stayed home and something I did, some tiny slip-up, gave me away? I decided I had to prepare. Subtly. I needed a bag, some essentials, and a way to get help the moment I was safe. Over the next couple of days, I lived in a state of constant, suppressed panic. I went to work, tried to act normal, but my focus was shot. My colleagues noticed I was off, quiet, jumpy. I mumbled something about stress. Inside, I was calculating. I started leaving small, important items in my backpack that I usually took to work anyway. My laptop, essential documents.
A few changes of clothes I rotated in over a couple of days, tucking them deep inside so they weren't obvious.
I made sure my phone was always charged, and I started looking up temporary shelters, emergency contact numbers, even police departments in other states. Somewhere far away, I also needed to make sure she couldn't track me. I knew she was tech-savvy. Was there tracking software on my phone or my laptop? I didn't know how to check without raising suspicion, but I knew the moment I was out, I needed to get a burner phone, ditch mine, and wipe my digital footprint as much as possible. The stress of pretending was immense. We'd have dinner, watch TV, and I'd be going through escape scenarios in my head. She'd sometimes catch my eye, and I'd quickly force a smile, try to look relaxed. Did she see through it? I couldn't tell. She was too good. My friends were worried about me. Sarah called. You okay? You sound off. I desperately wanted to tell her, to spill everything, but the fear held me back. What if Isabella was monitoring my calls? What if telling Sarah put her in danger? Yeah, just work stuff, I lied. Really slammed. It killed me to lie to my friend, but I felt I had no choice. I was on my own. I decided my best window would be when she left for one of her longer trips. Those usually involved packing the duffel bag and being gone for several days. That would give me time. Time to get far away before she realized I was gone, before she started looking for me. I had to wait. Waiting was agonizing. Every day felt like an eternity. I continued my subtle preparations. I made sure I had enough cash on me, tucked away securely. I memorized important phone numbers, knowing I might have to abandon my phone. I even started leaving the house for longer periods under the guise of errands or getting coffee, just to see if she reacted, if she seemed suspicious. She didn't. She just smiled, told me to be careful. Was that genuine concern? Or the confidence of someone
who knew exactly where I was? I couldn't be sure. Then finally, she got the call. Late on a Wednesday night, the same tense, hushed tone, a language I didn't understand. She hung up, her face grim but focused. Work crisis, she said, turning to me, her eyes meeting mine.
For a split second, I thought she saw the truth in my eyes, but her expression remained neutral, calculating. I have to leave first thing in the morning. Unexpected trip. Likely a few days, maybe a week. My heart leapt into my throat. This was it. My chance. I had to play it cool. Oh, okay, I said, trying to sound disappointed but understanding. Another one. Be careful out there. The irony of me telling her to be careful while I was planning to flee from her was almost comical in a dark, twisted way. She packed her duffel bag. I watched her every move, knowing what that bag represented, what these trips truly were. The monster was getting ready to go hunting again, and I was about to make my escape. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye. See you soon, darling, she said, that practiced, charming smile in place. Miss you? Miss you too, I lied, my voice thick with unspoken fear, and the desperate hope that I would never see her again. I watched from the window as her car pulled away. I waited until it was completely out of sight, until the sound of the engine faded into the normal morning traffic noise. Then the facade dropped. The panic surged, but this time it was mixed with a surge of pure, raw adrenaline. Now, it had to be now. I grabbed the backpack I'd been subtly packing. I checked my pockets, phone, keys, cash, a small multi-tool I'd packed just in case. I took one last look around the house that had been my home and my prison. The place where I had been so completely, utterly fooled. It felt tainted, full of ghosts of lies and unspoken horrors. I double-checked. The front door was locked behind me. Ironic, leaving a house locked against the person whose house it actually was, whose life was built on breaking and entering and taking people. I walked quickly, trying not to run, trying not to draw attention. I didn't have a car. She usually drove us places, or I took public transport. I headed straight for the nearest bus stop, my heart pounding with every step. My plan was simple. Get downtown, go to a different bank than ours, withdraw as much cash as possible from my account, find a cheap motel far from our neighborhood, and figure out my next move from there. Call someone? The police? A lawyer? Someone who could help me navigate this impossible, terrifying situation. Getting on that bus felt like the first breath of fresh air I'd taken in weeks, even through my fear. As the bus pulled away, putting distance between me and that house, between me and Isabella, I risked a glance back. The house looked normal, innocuous, just a house in a quiet neighborhood. No one would ever guess the dark, horrific truth it contained. I was out. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of the escape. I was a single person, on a public bus, carrying a backpack of essentials, fleeing from a professional kidnapper who probably had resources and connections I couldn't even imagine. She would realize I was gone eventually, and then she would know. The hunter would become the hunted. My escape had just started. Getting away from the house was just the first terrifying step. Now I was out in the world, alone, with the knowledge that the woman I'd been living with was a professional kidnapper. Every face in the crowd seemed to scrutinize me. Every passing car felt like a potential threat. My paranoia was through the roof, but unlike Isabella's, mine was based on a horrifying reality. My immediate goal was distance and anonymity. I didn't want to be found, not by her, and not yet by anyone else. I took the bus downtown, keeping an eye out, half expecting to see her car following me, half expecting her to suddenly appear next to me with that chillingly calm expression. I got off the bus several stops early just in case and walked the rest of the way to a bank I knew she never used. I withdrew a significant amount of cash, enough to survive on for a little while, enough to disappear for a bit. Seeing the money in my hand felt both empowering and terrifying. This was my lifeline, bought with the years I'd unknowingly spent living with a criminal. From the bank, I went to a prepaid mobile store. I bought the cheapest burner phone I could find, paid
in cash.
The moment I was outside, I turned off my regular phone, removed the SIM card, and wrapped it in foil to hopefully block any tracking signal. I shoved it deep into my backpack. The burner phone felt cheap and unfamiliar in my hand, but it was a connection to the outside world that she hopefully didn't know about. Next, a motel. Not a fancy one, just a place far across town, near the interstate, the kind of place travelers stop for a night. I paid in cash for 3 nights, using a fake name I pulled out of thin air. Handing over the cash felt exposed, but it was better than using a card she might be able to trace. Finally, I was in the small, sterile motel room. I locked the door, double-checked the deadbolt, looked out the window at the anonymous parking lot. I was safe. For now. The adrenaline that had been pumping through me for days finally started to recede, leaving behind a crushing wave of exhaustion, fear, and grief. Grief for the relationship I thought I had. Grief for the woman I thought I knew. Grief for the life that had just imploded. I sat on the edge of the bed, the cheap motel blanket scratching my hand. What now? I had escaped the immediate danger, but I couldn't hide forever. This wasn't a problem I could solve by myself. Isabella was a professional. She had resources, contacts, skills I could only guess at.
I needed help. I needed to tell someone. My mind went back to the police. It still felt risky. But who else? A lawyer who specialized in my partner is a professional international kidnapper. It sounded unbelievable, but the alternative was living on the run, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for her to find me. I decided I had to go to the authorities. I needed to report what I knew, turn over the evidence I had found, the fake passports. I had taken photos of them.
And the ledger with my phone before I left. Thank God I had that instinct. The details about Eliza Vance, the Mr. Dubois connection, everything. It felt like an enormous, terrifying step. What if they didn't believe me? What if they dismissed me as crazy? What if contacting them somehow tipped her off definitively? I spent a long time staring at the burner phone, my finger hovering over the screen, thinking about dialing 911 or the local police non-emergency number. My hands were shaking again. This wasn't just reporting a crime. This was dismantling the
life of someone I had loved, someone who was incredibly dangerous.
But I knew I had to. Not just for my own safety, but because of what she was doing. She was hurting innocent people. She had to be stopped. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I finally dialed the number for the local police department. My
voice was shaky as I started to explain. I need to report something. It's about someone I know, my girlfriend. I think she's involved in very serious crimes, international crimes, kidnapping. The operator was calm, professional, but
I could hear the slight pause, the shift in tone. This wasn't their usual domestic disturbance call. They transferred me to a detective. I had to start again, laying out the unbelievable story piece by piece. The whirlwind romance, the moving in, the red flags, the suspicion, the discovery of the lockpicks and burner phone, the fake passports, the coded ledger, the Eliza Vance identity, the security training, and finally, the terrifying connection to the Claude Dubois kidnapping. It took hours. They sent officers to the motel to
meet me.
I showed them the photos I'd taken of the passports and the ledger entries. I recounted every detail I could remember. They listened, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and growing concern. You could tell they were struggling to process it. This wasn't standard police work. They took me to the station. More questions. Other agencies got involved. Federal agents, people who seemed to specialize in international crime and human trafficking. The photos of the passports and the ledger structure were taken seriously. The mention of the security training and the specific details about the Dubois case lent credibility. Slowly, painstakingly, they started to piece together the fragments
of the picture I was showing them. The picture of a ghost, a chameleon, moving through the world, facilitating abductions. While I was at the station, giving my statement, trying to answer endless questions, I learned what happened at the house.
The police had gone there cautiously. She wasn't there. Her car was gone. They found the hollowed-out book, the lockpicks, the foreign currency stashes. But the passports were gone. The laptop I had used to access the ledger was gone. She had clearly realized something was wrong. Maybe she came back briefly, maybe she had a remote alert system, maybe she just sensed it. She had left, and she had taken the most damning physical evidence with her. The relief that I had already left washed
over me again.
I had gotten out just in time. But the fear returned tenfold. She was out there. She knew I had gone to the police. She knew I knew everything. The immediate aftermath was a blur of police protection, safe houses, debriefings. My life was no longer my own. I was a witness, potentially a target. The public fallout was immense when the story eventually started leaking. Rumors of a professional kidnapper operating undetected for years, hints about the elaborate cover she maintained, my connection to her. My name wasn't initially released, but my friends, my family, they knew it was me, their shock, their horror, their fear for me. It was another layer of trauma. I had survived living with the monster. But the nightmare wasn't over. She was still out there, a ghost in the system, potentially plotting her next move. And I was left to deal with the wreckage of my life, the deep, painful scars of betrayal, and the constant gnawing fear that she might one day come back to collect her
final package.
Getting away from the house, escaping her immediate physical presence, felt like shedding a skin, a necessary, painful, tearing away from a life built on rot. But as Section 9 described, that was just the start of the fallout. I was out of the immediate danger zone. But the nightmare wasn't over. It had just changed form. The days immediately following my escape were a blur of sterile rooms and hushed voices. The police, the federal agents, they were professional, mostly kind, but relentless. I was moved from the motel to a series of safe houses, anonymous apartments, sparsely furnished, always with an officer nearby. There was no privacy, no moment to myself to just process the sheer, overwhelming horror of what I had lived through. It was constant questioning, recounting the same story, every detail of Isabella, her habits, her schedule, the house, the weird things I'd seen. They were building a profile, trying to understand how someone could operate like this for so long, undetected, and how she managed to disappear so completely the moment they moved in on the house. They were frustrated. She was a ghost. She had taken the laptop, the physical address book, the passports. She had scrubbed everything digital. The photos I had taken on my old phone were crucial but limited. They showed the passports, the structure of the ledger, the Dubois entry, undeniable proof of her identities and method, but without the physical evidence. Without her, it was harder to track her network, her clients, her victims. They put out alerts, shared her photos under various names they were now linking to her, but she was a master chameleon who likely had dozens, maybe hundreds, of identities and bolt holes around the world. Finding her felt like looking for a single drop of water in the ocean. The investigation became a long, drawn-out process. Weeks turned into months. The safe houses continued, though less stringently as time went on, and no immediate threat materialized. But the fear never went away. Every time the door opened, every unfamiliar car on the street, every late-night sound, my heart leapt into my throat. Was it her? Had she found me? My nervous system was completely shot. I was hyper-vigilant, all the time, just like she had been, only for real reasons. Then the story started to leak. Not my name initially, but whispers of a major international criminal, a professional kidnapper operating under deep cover for years, discovered through a domestic relationship. The media latched onto it. The girlfriend who was a ghost. The partner of the kidnapper. It was sensationalized, distorted. While my name wasn't plastered everywhere at first, it wasn't hard for people who knew me to figure it out. The calls and messages from friends and family started, their shock, their horror, their profound relief that I was safe, but also their fear for me. It was overwhelming, having to explain over and over to people I loved that the woman I had brought into their lives, the woman they had welcomed and liked, was a monster. Seeing the horror in their eyes, it was another layer of trauma. Sarah, bless her, was incredible. She came to visit me in the safe house, sat with me for hours, just letting me talk, cry, rage. I knew there was something off, she kept saying, shaking her head, but never anything like this. How did you even survive? Liam was devastated, racked with guilt for introducing us, even though it wasn't his fault. My family was terrified, wanting me to come back east, but the agents advised against it initially, fearing she might track my movements to family. Living with the betrayal was one of the hardest parts. It wasn't just that she lied, it was the
depth, the calculated cruelty of it. Every shared laugh, every intimate moment, every promise of a future. It was all a lie, a performance. I felt like the biggest fool on earth.
How could I have been so blind? How could I have fallen for it so completely? The manipulation wasn't just about hiding her job, it was about controlling me, keeping me unsuspecting, maybe even using me as a cover or a resource in ways I still didn't fully understand. The realization that I had been a pawn in her horrifying game was soul-crushing. Trust felt impossible. How could I ever trust my own judgment again? How could I ever trust anyone after being so profoundly deceived by
Someone I loved and lived with?
the grief for the relationship was real, like mourning someone who had died, only worse. Because the person wasn't dead, they were a monster who never existed in the first place. It was mourning a ghost, a fabrication. It was confusing, painful, and deeply isolating. Physically, I was exhausted, constantly on edge. Sleep was elusive, plagued by nightmares of her, of faceless victims, of being trapped. I lost weight. My short-term memory was shot from the stress and lack of sleep. The key?
Agents pushed me to get therapy, and I did.
It was a slow, difficult process, talking through the trauma, the fear, the betrayal, the crushing weight of knowing what she did and that she was still out there. Learning coping mechanisms for the anxiety and hypervigilance. Trying to rebuild a sense of self that wasn't defined by being her unsuspecting partner. Financially, it was also a mess. Our shared accounts were frozen as part of the investigation. My own savings were limited. I lost my job, I couldn't focus, and the stress, the safe houses, the debriefings made it impossible to maintain any kind of normal work schedule. I had to start over from scratch. Getting a new apartment felt terrifying. Choosing a neighborhood, checking locks, feeling safe anywhere felt impossible. Every potential landlord, every new colleague, every new person I met, I looked at them through a lens of suspicion. Could they be like her? Hiding something monstrous? Slowly, painfully, I started picking up the pieces. Therapy helped. Relying on my friends and family, finally letting them in, talking to them, helped anchor me to reality, to genuine connection. I started small, finding a new, quiet apartment far from the old neighborhood, getting a new, simple job that didn't require intense focus initially, re-establishing routines. Small steps towards building a new life, a life that was authentically mine, not one that was part of someone else's horrifying script. But the scar remains. The knowledge of what she was, what she did, and that she's still out there, a ghost in the system, a potential threat. The agents are still looking, but the leads are cold. She was too good, too prepared. There's no closure in her capture, not yet anyway. Maybe never. Living with the fear is something I've had to learn to manage. It's a dull ache under the surface most days, a sharp spike of panic on others. I still check locks. I'm still hyper-aware of my surroundings. I still sometimes see a face in a crowd, a gesture, a car that sends a jolt of terror through me. The trauma of living with a professional kidnapper, of loving a monster, doesn't just disappear, it changes you fundamentally. But I survived. I got out. I exposed what I could. I'm rebuilding slowly, painfully, trying to create a life based on truth and genuine connection, the exact opposite of everything she represented. It's a long road, and the shadows she left behind are long, but I'm walking it, day by day, picking up the pieces one by one. And so we arrive here, at the quiet close of it all. The roller coaster has come to a stop, the breathless drops, and sharp turns now just echoes, fading in the stillness of the night. Looking back, it almost feels distant, like a vivid, terrible dream I somehow navigated my way out of. Sharing it, laying it all bare like this, has a strange way of settling the dust, bringing a finality to the chaos that once consumed everything. The truth When it finally stands before you, stark and undeniable, is a heavy thing. It shatters. The comfortable illusions, yes, but beneath the wreckage there's also a strange kind of relief. The not knowing, the constant unease, that was its own slow torture. Facing the reality, as horrifying as it was, allowed the healing to finally begin, slow and tentative, like tender, new growth pushing through scorched earth. What did I learn? That appearances can be the most cunning disguise. That the human capacity for deception and for survival runs deeper than you can imagine. But also that resilience isn't about being unbreakable. It's about finding a way to piece yourself back together, even if the seams always show. It's about reclaiming your own quiet corner of peace after being dragged through someone else's storm. If there's any message woven into this long, winding tale, it's perhaps this: trust your gut, guard your peace fiercely, and remember that even in the deepest shadows, the dawn will eventually break. The images, the sounds, they'll fade now, settling into the quiet corners of memory where they belong. There's no need to hold on to the tension anymore. Just let the stillness wash over you, like a gentle tide receding after the storm has passed. Thank you for walking this path with me tonight, for listening to the full story, every difficult step of the way. It means more than you know. Feel free now, if you're tired, if the day was long, to just drift. And with that, our story closes. I hope it brought you some perspective, or at least a captivating escape. Sleep deeply.